The antiseptic smell still clings to my nostrils as I write this, 3 months after the surgery that changed everything. Not the surgery itself, a routine appendectomy that went sideways when my appendix ruptured, but what happened while I was under the knife, fighting for my life. Marcus chose that moment, while I was bleeding internally on the operating table, to step outside and take her call. I discovered this not from him, but from my nurse Sarah, who mentioned it casually during my recovery. Your husband was so devoted, she said, adjusting my IV. Even when that woman kept calling during your surgery, he only stepped out once to tell her you were in operation. Most men would have just turned off their phones. The morphine couldn't numb the slice of that revelation. What woman? I asked, though my heart already knew. Oh, I probably shouldn't have. I just assumed you knew. She called 4 times during your 3-hour surgery. Very persistent. Your husband seems stressed about it. Vivian Chen, his business partner in the consulting firm they'd launched 6 months ago. The woman with the musical laugh and the habit of touching his arm when she spoke. The woman he assured me was just a colleague when I'd voiced my concerns. Lying in that sterile hospital bed with staples holding my abdomen together and the truth holding my marriage apart, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. I would heal first. And then, when I was strong enough, I would prioritize something he'd clearly forgotten how to do. Myself. The first week home was a masterclass in emotional surgery without anesthesia. Marcus played the devoted husband perfectly, bringing me soup, fluffing pillows, asking about my pain levels. But I watched him now with different eyes, cataloging every glance at his phone, every quick work call he took in the next room, every moment his attention drifted to something, someone else. You're quiet today, he said on Thursday, settling beside me on our cream leather sofa. The material felt cold against my skin, like everything else in our pristine Belltown condo. Still processing, I replied, which wasn't a lie. I was processing everything. Our 5-year marriage, the business he'd built while I funded it with my marketing director salary, the way he'd gradually made me feel like an accessory in my own life. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it reflexively, and I caught the flash of her name on the screen before he set it face down. Aren't you going to answer that? I asked innocently. It's not important right now. You're my priority. Such pretty words. Too bad they came 3 months too late. That night, while Marcus slept, I opened my laptop and began researching. Not Vivian. I already knew enough about her MBA from Wharton, her successful track record, her recent divorce. I researched something far more interesting: the consulting contracts Marcus thought I knew nothing about. See, there's an advantage to being underestimated. Marcus had always handled the business side of things, assuming my marketing background made me financially naive. He'd forgotten that I'd built comprehensive digital campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, that reading between corporate lines was my specialty. What I found in the public records made my incision site throb with something darker than physical pain. Their consulting firm, Chen and Associates, had landed 3 major contracts in the past 6 months. Contracts worth $2.3 million total. But according to the incorporation documents I'd helped him file, back when I still thought we were partners in life and business, I owned 40% of any ventures started during our marriage using marital assets. Assets like the $50,000 I'd loaned him from my inheritance to start the business. Assets like the home office space he'd been using rent-free. Assets like the health insurance that covered his pre-existing anxiety condition. Marcus had been building his empire while I recovered from surgery, never mentioning the windfalls. But what made my blood simmer wasn't the money. It was the deliberate exclusion. He'd been planning a future that didn't include me, one conversation with Vivian at a time. I closed the laptop and made a decision that felt as clean and necessary as the surgeon's scalpel. I was going to take back everything that was mine. Recovery gave me time to plan, and planning had always been my strength. By week 3, when I could walk without doubling over, I'd crafted a strategy as methodical as a surgical procedure. Step 1. Documentation. I began photographing everything: the home office setup, the equipment purchased with marital funds, every receipt and document Marcus left carelessly around our shared space. I created a digital trail that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy. Step 2, professional consultation. I called Elena Rodriguez, the best divorce attorney in Seattle and a former client from my marketing days. She agreed to meet me at a small cafe in Capitol Hill, far from Marcus's usual haunts. 40% of a business started with marital assets, Elena mused, reviewing my preliminary documentation over Ethiopian coffee that tasted like possibility, plus emotional damage from adultery during a medical crisis. We could make this very expensive for him. I don't want just money, I said, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. I want him to understand what it feels like to have everything you've built crumble while someone you trusted watches it happen. Elena's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Now you're speaking my language. Step 3, allies. This proved easier than I'd anticipated. When I'd built Marcus's initial marketing strategy, I'd networked extensively in the consulting world. One name kept surfacing in my research. David Park, CEO of Titan Strategic Solutions, Chen and Associates' biggest competitor. I'd met David at several industry events. He was the kind of man who remembered your name and asked thoughtful questions, whose presence commanded rooms without demanding attention. More importantly, he had a reputation for ethical business practices and zero tolerance for corporate deception. I called his office on a Friday afternoon. Isabella Chen, his assistant said, Mr. Park remembers you from the Northwest Consulting Summit. He can meet Tuesday at 2. Not Isabella Chen much longer if everything went according to plan. David's downtown office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Columbia Center, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made our condo's vista look pedestrian. He greeted me with the same genuine warmth I remembered, though his eyes sharpened when he noticed my careful movements. I heard about your surgery, he said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. I hope you're feeling better. Getting stronger every day, I replied, settling into the butter-soft leather. Thank you for meeting with me. Your call intrigued me. You mentioned having information about Chen and Associates that might interest Titan. I opened my portfolio, the same leather-bound case I'd used for marketing presentations, now repurposed for corporate warfare. My husband and his business partner have been less than transparent about their recent success. I thought you should know about some irregularities in how they've been acquiring contracts. What followed was an hour of revelation that transformed David's professional interest into something much more focused. The documents I'd gathered painted a picture of bid manipulation, client poaching from their previous firms, and contract terms that skirted ethical boundaries. This is substantial, David said finally, his fingers steepled as he processed the implications. Some of these practices could trigger ethics investigations, particularly the way they leveraged client relationships from their former positions. I thought you should know, given that you're bidding against them for the Morrison Group contract next month, I said casually. His eyebrows rose slightly. How did you know about Morrison? I still have friends in the industry, and I've been paying very close attention to my husband's business activities lately. Something shifted in David's expression, a recognition of the calculation behind my apparent candor. What do you want, Isabella? I appreciated the directness. I want justice, and I want to ensure that companies like yours who play by the rules aren't disadvantaged by those who don't. And personally? Personally, I want my husband to understand that actions have consequences, even when you think no one is watching. David leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. You know, Titan has been looking for a strategic marketing director, someone with your background and particular insights into the consulting landscape. The offer hung in the air like the antiseptic scent that still haunted my dreams. But this time, it smelled like opportunity. I'd be very interested in discussing that, I said, once my current legal situation is resolved. Of course. And Isabella? His voice carried a weight that made my pulse quicken. I want you to know that some of us in this industry value loyalty. Real loyalty. Not the kind that disappears the moment someone more interesting calls. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not the surgical site, but something deeper. The knot of betrayal that had been choking me since the hospital began to ease. I'm learning to value that too, I replied. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Marcus to walk into it. I didn't have to wait long. That Thursday evening, he came home with an energy I hadn't seen in months. His face was flushed with excitement, his movements quick and animated as he poured himself a scotch from the bottle I'd given him for our anniversary. "Great news," he announced, settling beside me on the sofa. "We just landed the Morrison Group contract. Biggest deal in the firm's history. $800,000 over 2 years." "Congratulations," I said, injecting just the right amount of enthusiasm into my voice. "You and Vivian must be thrilled." He blinked, and I caught the micro-expression of surprise before he smoothed it away. It was a team effort, but yes, Vivian was instrumental in closing the deal. I'm sure she was. I reached for his hand, letting my fingers trace the wedding ring he still wore. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "We can finally start planning that European trip we've talked about. With the business doing so well, we can afford to take time for us again." The guilt that flickered across his features was almost too easy to read. "Actually, honey, this contract is going to require a lot of hands-on work over the next few months. Vivian and I will probably need to travel extensively, build relationships with the client team." "Of course," I murmured, "business first." That night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Elena Rodriguez, confirming that Marcus had now made his situation significantly worse by lying about business income during what would soon be divorce proceedings. The second was to David Park. "The Morrison contract," I said without preamble when he answered. "What about it?" "They announced it today. 800,000 over 2 years." A pause. "That's interesting, considering Morrison called me this afternoon to inform me that Chen and Associates had been disqualified due to ethics concerns raised by an anonymous tip." I felt my heart rate spike. Disqualified? Completely. Morrison is very particular about their vendors' integrity. Apparently, someone provided them with documentation about Chen and Associates' questionable practices. They've decided to go with Titan instead. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implication. "David," I said carefully, "I didn't ask you to—" "You didn't ask me to do anything," he interrupted, his voice warm with something that might have been admiration. "You simply provided information. What Morrison did with that information was entirely their choice." I closed my eyes, imagining Marcus's face when he discovered the truth. The way his excitement would crumble. The way he'd scramble to understand what had gone wrong. "Isabella?" David's voice was softer now. "Are you all right?" "I'm healing," I said, and meant it in ways that went far beyond the surgical site. "I'm finally healing." The next morning brought the kind of chaos that makes television drama look understated. Marcus received the call from Morrison at 7:43 a.m. while he was making coffee in our pristine white kitchen. I watched from the breakfast nook as his face went through a complete emotional spectrum: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a gray pallor that made him look older than his 34 years. "What do you mean, ethics concerns?" he was saying into the phone, his free hand gripping the marble countertop. "We've done nothing unethical. This is completely unprecedented." I sipped my tea, chamomile for healing, and watched my husband's carefully constructed world begin its collapse. After he hung up, he stood motionless for several minutes, staring at his phone like it might offer different news if he looked long enough. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I could have scripted his response. "Morrison pulled the contract. They claim someone provided them with information about our business practices. It's impossible. We've done everything by the book." "That's terrible," I said, setting down my cup with deliberate care. "Who would do something like that?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." His voice carried a promise of violence that would have frightened me 6 months ago. Now it just sounded impotent. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, pausing only to kiss my forehead with lips that felt like duty rather than affection. "I'll be at the office all day. Vivian and I need to figure out our next steps." "Of course." In crisis, he turned to her. After he left, I called in sick to my own job, a consideration Marcus hadn't shown me during my actual medical crisis, and spent the morning implementing the final phase of my plan. The first call was to our bank, requesting detailed statements for all accounts associated with Chen and Associates. As a spouse on the business insurance and someone who'd co signed the initial business loan, I had every legal right to this information. The second call was to the IRS tip line. If Marcus and Vivian had been hiding business income, as my research suggested, the federal government would be very interested in unpaid taxes. The third call was to Elena Rodriguez. It's time, I said simply. I'll file the papers this afternoon, she replied. Are you ready for this? I looked around our condo at the expensive furniture we'd chosen together, the art we'd collected, the life we'd built on what I now understood were lies and false promises. I've been ready since the moment he chose her call over my surgery. Marcus came home that evening looking like he'd aged a decade in 8 hours. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, his hair mussed from running his hands through it. Bad day? I asked from the sofa, where I'd been reading, appropriately enough, a novel about a woman who disappeared from her cheating husband's life. The worst, he muttered, pouring himself a scotch with hands that shook slightly. Morrison wasn't our only problem. Apparently, someone has been conducting a systematic campaign to undermine our business. 3 other potential clients called today with concerns about our practices. That sounds like business sabotage, I said, careful to keep my voice neutral. Do you have any idea who might want to hurt you? He slumped into the chair across from me, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. David Park, he said finally. It has to be. Titan Strategic has been our biggest competitor, and they just happened to get the Morrison contract after we were disqualified. It's too convenient to be coincidence. Have you done anything that might give him ammunition? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Of course not, Marcus said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. We've been completely ethical. Someone is manufacturing evidence, creating problems where none exist. I nodded sympathetically while mentally reviewing the very real documentation I'd provided to Morrison and others. Nothing manufactured, just information Marcus had assumed would never see the light of day. What will you do? Fight back. Vivian thinks we should hire a private investigator, maybe a crisis management firm. We can't let Park destroy what we've built. What we've built. Still not what I've helped build or what you've built with my support. Just the royal we that included everyone except the wife who'd funded and supported and believed. That sounds expensive, I observed. We have the resources. He finished his scotch and reached for the bottle again. The business has been very profitable. Finally, an admission of the success he'd been hiding from me. I'm glad, I said. It makes what happens next much cleaner. He paused with the bottle halfway to his glass. What happens next? I reached into the side table drawer and withdrew the envelope Elena had couriered over that afternoon. The paper was cream-colored and expensive, like everything else about Elena Rodriguez's practice. Divorce papers, I said, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. And a lawsuit for my share of the business assets you've been hiding. The bottle slipped from his hands, crashing to the hardwood floor in an explosion of glass and amber liquid that smelled like the death of false promises. Isabella, what? How? He stared at the envelope like it might burst into flames. You can't be serious. 40% of Chen and Associates, plus damages for adultery and emotional distress. Elena thinks we have an excellent case, especially given your activities during my medical crisis. The color drained from his face so completely, I wondered if he might faint. Medical crisis? Isabella, I don't understand what you're talking about. Vivian's calls during my surgery, Marcus. 4 times while I was on the operating table, and you stepped outside to take one of them. Sarah, my nurse, mentioned it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. That's not what you think. She was calling about business. On a Sunday, during a medical emergency? I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in months. What business was so important that it couldn't wait until your wife was out of surgery? She was worried about you too. Stop. The word came out with surgical precision, cutting through his stammering excuses. Just stop. I know about the hidden contracts. I know about the unreported income. I know about the way you've been planning a future that doesn't include me while I've been planning our recovery. He collapsed back into his chair, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. How did you find out? You forgot that I'm actually quite good at research and analysis, Marcus. You got so comfortable seeing me as just the supportive wife that you forgot I built my career on uncovering information people prefer to keep hidden. I walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline that would soon be just my view, not ours. The irony is that if you just talked to me, included me, treated me like a partner instead of an obstacle, we might have worked through this. But you chose to lie and hide and plan your escape while I was healing from surgery. Isabella, please, we can fix this. I made mistakes, but you made choices, I corrected, turning back to face him. And now I'm making mine. The next 6 months unfolded like a masterclass in consequences. Marcus hired the crisis management firm and the private investigator, burning through the business's cash reserves while Elena and I methodically built our case. Every dollar he spent on damage control was a dollar that wouldn't be available when the court ordered him to pay his wife's share of the business. The IRS investigation Elena had predicted began in earnest when they discovered the unreported income from Marcus's contracts. Chen and Associates' books were frozen, while federal auditors went through every transaction with microscopic attention. Vivian, it turned out, was less committed to Marcus when the relationship involved potential federal tax liability. She dissolved their business partnership and started her own consulting firm, taking 2 of their remaining clients with her. The woman who'd called 4 times during my surgery couldn't be bothered to return Marcus's calls when the walls started closing in. David Park proved to be everything Marcus wasn't: ethical, transparent, and genuinely interested in building something together, rather than taking what someone else had built. When he offered me the strategic marketing director position at Titan, the contract included equity, full disclosure of all business dealings, and a clause that any major business decisions would be made collaboratively. I want partners, not employees, he explained over dinner at Canley's, the city lights spreading below us like promises waiting to be kept. What happened to you? It clarifies what matters in business relationships: trust, transparency, mutual respect. And if the business grows, if there are opportunities that require travel or long hours, then we plan together, we communicate. We make sure that personal relationships are protected, not sacrificed. He paused, his hand covering mine on the white tablecloth. Some things are more important than any contract. 6 months after Marcus received the divorce papers, Elena called with the final settlement numbers. 40% of a business that had been worth over $2 million before the IRS investigation, the client defections, and the legal fees. Even after the business's collapse, my share came to $340,000, enough to buy my own condo, start my own consulting practice, or simply invest in the future I was building with David. He's requesting a meeting, Elena told me. One last conversation before we finalize everything. I considered it while standing in my new apartment in Belltown, smaller than the condo I'd shared with Marcus, but entirely mine. Through the windows, I could see Elliott Bay and the mountains beyond, a view that reminded me daily of the horizons that had opened when I stopped looking backward. No, I said finally. We have nothing left to discuss. I ran into Marcus 6 months later at Whole Foods in Capitol Hill. I was shopping for ingredients for dinner with David. We were cooking together most nights now, a simple domestic pleasure that felt revolutionary after years of marriage to a man who viewed home as a hotel between business trips. Marcus looked smaller somehow, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and pushing a cart with generic brands I'd never seen in our kitchen. His hair was graying at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during our marriage. "Isabella," he said, his voice carrying surprise and something that might have been relief. You look wonderful." I was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, nothing special, but I felt the truth of his words. I did look wonderful, healthier, stronger, more alive than I'd been in years. "Thank you," I said, not returning the compliment because it wouldn't have been honest. "I heard about your new position at Titan. Congratulations." Word travels fast in consulting circles. "Are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. I considered lying, offering some polite non-answer that would end the conversation quickly. Instead, I found myself giving him the truth. "Yes, I'm happy. I'm building something that's mine with someone who values my contributions. I'm healing in ways I didn't know I needed to heal." He nodded slowly, his eyes studying my face like he was seeing me for the first time. I fucked up, he said quietly. Everything. The business, our marriage, the way I treated you during your surgery. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I understand what I lost. What you threw away, I corrected gently. I offered you everything, Marcus. Partnership, loyalty, love, support. You chose to look elsewhere for something you already had. I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. Vivian, that wasn't love. That was just ego and excitement and the thrill of something new. What we had was real, and I was too stupid to appreciate it. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the anger I'd been carrying. He looked so diminished, so aware of his losses, that maintaining hatred felt like holding on to poison. I hope you learned something from it, I said. I hope next time you'll choose better. There won't be a next time like what we had, he said. I know that now. I nodded and moved to push my cart past him, our conversation reaching its natural end. But he stopped me with a gentle touch on my arm. Isabella, I'm glad you're happy. I mean that. You deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I said simply. I did. That evening, David and I cooked salmon with dill and lemon, paired with a Washington Riesling that tasted like the future. Over dinner, I told him about the encounter with Marcus, watching his face for signs of jealousy or concern. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. How do you feel? He asked. Free, I said, surprised by the immediate honesty of the answer. For the first time since the surgery, I feel completely free. Good. He lifted our joined hands and kissed my knuckles, a gesture so tender, it made my chest tight with possibility. You know what I realized today? What? I love you. The words settled between us like a perfect surgical suture, clean, healing, exactly what was needed. I love you too, I replied, and meant it in ways that went deeper than romance. I loved the man who'd helped me reclaim my power, who'd shown me what partnership could look like, who'd prioritized my healing over everything else. Later that night, as we lay in bed in the apartment that was becoming our home, David traced the scar from my surgery with gentle fingers. Does it still hurt? He asked. Sometimes, I said, but not like it used to. Now it just reminds me that I survived, that I healed, that I'm stronger than the thing that tried to destroy me. He pressed a kiss to the thin line on my abdomen, and I felt the last knot of anger and betrayal finally release. I had prioritized my healing, and in doing so, I'd found something I'd never had with Marcus, a love that prioritized me back. The scar would always be there, a reminder of the day my old life ended and my real life began. But scars are just proof that the body knows how to repair itself, how to become stronger at the broken places, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, the heart learns to do the same. 3 years later, David and I would marry in a ceremony that prioritized joy over spectacle, partnership over performance. Our vows would include promises about communication during crises, about being present for each other's vulnerable moments, about building something together that could weather any storm. But that night in our bed, with Seattle's lights painting patterns on our ceiling and his arms strong around me, I understood that I'd already married the most important person I could, myself. The woman who'd survived betrayal and surgery and the death of false promises. The woman who'd learned to prioritize her own healing. The woman who'd discovered that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so beautiful that the people who abandoned you can only watch from the outside, finally understanding what they lost. Marcus had prioritized her call during my surgery. I had prioritized becoming someone who would never again accept so little from someone who claimed to love me. And in the end, that made all the difference.